January 1288, Bach Dang River. A Vietnamese general named Tran Hung Dao watches 400 Mongol warships sailing toward his kingdom, the empire that ruled from Poland to Korea. That turned Baghdad to ashes. That massacred more than 80 million people in its relentless march across the world. Now, for the third time, it advances on Vietnam. Kublai Khan has staked everything: 400 ships, thousands of warriors, Chinese siege technology, the largest naval force the Mongols ever assembled. The question is simple: how did a tiny kingdom defeat the deadliest empire in history? The secret wasn't soldiers, wasn't gold, wasn't fortresses. It was something so simple the Mongols never saw it coming, not until their fleets were sinking. This is the story of the Bach Dang trap. And trust me, it's not what you expect. The Mongols weren't just conquerors. They were a force that redefined war. In less than 100 years, they built the largest contiguous empire in history. 16 million square kilometers, more territory than Rome, Persia, and the British Empire combined. Cities that resisted were erased. Baghdad, in 1258, lost 800,000 people in a week. The Tigris ran black with the ink of destroyed manuscripts, then red with blood. Fear preceded the Mongols. Cities surrendered before the first arrow. That reputation was a psychological weapon. And it worked. But then came Vietnam. A kingdom that should have been just another name on the conquest list. Except it wasn't. Think of it like a chess match where one player has all the powerful pieces: queen, rooks, knights. But the board is made of quicksand. Dai Viet, ruled by the Tran dynasty since 1225, had unique geography. River deltas, dense jungles, mountains to the north, and a people who had resisted Chinese invasions for 1,000 years. They knew how to fight on terrain that favored mobility and local knowledge. When the first Mongol invasion came in 1258, led by General Uryankadai, the Vietnamese used guerrilla tactics. They burned crops, poisoned wells, attacked supply lines. The Mongols won some battles but couldn't sustain an occupation. They withdrew. Kublai Khan didn't accept that. In 1285, he sent a second force. This time, the Mongols were more prepared. But the result was the same: guerrilla warfare, attrition, retreat. For Kublai, this was unacceptable. He had conquered China, subjugated Korea, established the Yuan dynasty as the center of the known world. Vietnam, a tiny kingdom compared to his domains, couldn't be the exception. In 1287, he began planning the third invasion. This time, it would be different. He would mobilize not just land armies, but a massive naval fleet. 400 warships, heavy ships, designed to carry troops, siege equipment, and supplies. The strategy was simple: control the Bach Dang River, which gave access to the heart of Dai Viet, and crush the capital, Thang Long, modern Hanoi. On paper, it was a plan that couldn't fail. But while Kublai mobilized his fleet, convinced the third attempt would be definitive, one man studied maps of the Bach Dang and saw something the Mongols would never see coming. Tran Hung Dao was no ordinary general. Born in 1228, he was a prince of the Tran dynasty and supreme commander of Vietnam's military forces. He studied the two previous invasions, analyzed Mongol weaknesses, and noticed something that would change everything. The Mongols were masters on land. Their cavalry tactics were legendary. But at sea, in narrow rivers, with heavy ships that required deep water, they had vulnerabilities. And the Bach Dang had a feature that could be exploited: the tides. I know what you're thinking. Tides? Seriously? It doesn't sound like a secret weapon that could destroy 400 warships. But here's the detail most commanders would ignore. But Tran Hung Dao wasn't your average general. He understood what he was dealing with: an estuary where the river meets the sea. The tide difference on the Bach Dang was 6 meters, about 20 feet. To get the scale, that's a 2-story building rising and falling every 12 hours. High tide? Heavy ships could sail through no problem. Low tide? The riverbed was exposed. Rocks, mud, sandbars. Ships trying to navigate that would run aground immediately. And Tran Hung Dao had a brilliant idea. What if we turned the tide itself into a weapon? That's the genius of the strategy. He didn't have the Mongols' fleet. He couldn't build heavy ships like they could. But he had something better: terrain knowledge and time. Months before the invasion, Tran Hung Dao mobilized thousands of workers. They cut trees from the forests near the river. Not just any trees, hard woods, like teak and bamboo. Strong yet flexible. Each trunk was sharpened to a razor point. Then came the crucial part. Iron tips. Iron-tipped wooden stakes, 10 to 16 feet tall each, sharp as spears. During low tide, when the riverbed was exposed, teams of workers waded in. They dug holes in the riverbed and planted the stakes. Solid. The height was calculated perfectly. High tide would submerge them completely invisible. But low tide would leave just the tips exposed, exactly where ship hulls would pass. Over 500 stakes. All planted along a strategic section of the river. All in secret. All at night. Away from any Mongol spies. The Mongols had no idea. That's the absolute brilliance of it. You've created an underwater minefield. Invisible. Only lethal under specific conditions. It's like building a mousetrap on a massive scale. And you're doing it with wood and iron resources any kingdom has access to. No advanced technology. Just ingenuity. Knowledge of the environment. Turning your biggest weakness, no navy, into your greatest weapon. And the Mongols? They never saw it coming. But you need more than stakes. You need to lure the enemy into the trap. The Vietnamese had a fleet small fishing boats and junks. Shallow draft vessels that could navigate the shallow waters with ease. Fast. Maneuverable. Perfect for what Tran Hung Dao had planned. The trap was set. Now he just had to wait. January 1288. General Togan leads the Mongol fleet into the Bach Dang estuary. 400 ships. The sight is devastating. Red-sailed Chinese warships carrying thousands of soldiers, siege equipment, supplies. The Mongols were confident. They'd won at sea before. Korea had fallen to their naval power. Why should Vietnam be any different? But Tran Hung Dao was waiting. The battle started with bait. The small Vietnamese fleet appeared on the horizon. Light ships, fewer in number, sailing at the river's edge. The Mongols saw their chance. They advanced. The Vietnamese ships, spotting the Mongol fleet, turned and retreated. A retreat. That's what it looked like anyway. The Mongols, eager to crush the resistance, gave chase. Heavy ships at full speed, pushed by high tide. They drove deeper into the river, chasing the Vietnamese vessels fleeing in apparent panic. It's called a feigned retreat. Ancient tactic. The Mongols used it at Liegnitz. The Romans used it against Hannibal. But this time, the hunters became the hunted. The empire that perfected the feigned retreat just fell for it. The irony is perfect. The Vietnamese ships knew the river. They knew where the stakes were. They sailed with shallow draft, so even if they passed over the planted areas, the stakes wouldn't reach them. But the Mongol ships, heavy and deep drafted, were sailing straight into the danger zone. Then the tide changed. Imagine a game where you know the rules, and suddenly they shift. Mid-match. No warning. No time to adapt. Tides work on a 12-hour cycle. High tide, then low tide. Tran Hung Dao had timed it perfectly. The Vietnamese appeared during high tide. The Mongols chased during high tide. But now, deep in the river, the water was dropping. Slowly. 6 meters over several hours. At first, nothing. The ship still floated. Then the first strikes. A Mongol warship at full speed hit something submerged. A wooden stake with an iron tip tears through the hull. Planking splits. Water rushes in. Another ship. Another. Panic spreads. Commanders scream retreat orders, but it's too late. The water's dropping. Damaged ships begin to ground themselves. Hulls scraping riverbed. Stakes jutting from the water like teeth. Then the realization hits. They're trapped. Picture it. 400 ships. Some sinking, some aground. All paralyzed. Low tide exposed the stakes. Now the Mongols saw it. Hundreds of wooden stakes punching through their hulls. No escape. Ships too damaged to move. Surrounded. Because now, the Vietnamese fleet returned. The Vietnamese vessels that had fled now turned. They sailed easily through shallow water. Closed in on the trapped Mongol ships. Attacked. Flaming arrows. Spears. Stones. The Mongols tried to fight back but had no advantage. Their ships were sitting ducks. The Vietnamese, fast and nimble, swarmed them. Ships caught fire. Mongol soldiers jumped overboard trying to swim to shore, but heavy armor dragged them under. They drowned. Others got captured. The few intact ships tried desperately to break free. but the stakes held them like a vice. When the tide rose again, the Bach was a graveyard. Wreckage everywhere. Bodies in the water. Of the 400 Mongol ships, over 350 were destroyed or captured. The entire fleet gone. General Togun and a handful of surviving ships fled. The invasion was finished, and with it, something else died. The myth of Mongol invincibility. Bach 1288 was the Mongol Empire's first major naval catastrophe. Until then, unbeatable. Armies fell in Poland, Hungary, Russia, China. But in a narrow Vietnamese river, a smaller force with few resources annihilated them. And here's the kicker. Their weapon cost almost nothing. Wood, iron, local knowledge, no advanced technology, just strategic brilliance. Kublai Khan never invaded Vietnam again. The loss was too devastating. The Mongol reputation, their greatest weapon, was damaged. If Vietnam could beat them, others could too. After 1288, Mongol expansion stalled. No significant new conquests. The empire that seemed destined to rule the world hit a wall. And that wall was the Bach River. Tran Hung Dao became a legend. More than just a general A symbol of Vietnamese defiance. Military schools still teach his tactics today. Because he proved something essential. Resources aren't everything in war. Terrain knowledge, perfect timing, creativity, these beat brute force. The Mongols had more ships, more soldiers, more gold. Tran Hung Dao had something they didn't. He knew the river. He knew the tides, and he weaponized that knowledge. Here's what makes this even more impressive. Bach 1288 wasn't the first time. 350 years earlier, in 938, Vietnamese General No Quyen used the exact same trick. Wooden stakes, low tide, same river, same victory. Tran Hung Dao knew this. He studied history. He learned what worked, and he replicated it. That's the point. Sometimes genius isn't inventing something new. It's understanding what already worked and adapting it perfectly. Think chess. A grandmaster doesn't win by inventing new pieces. He wins by knowing the board better. Anticipating moves, setting traps, sacrificing pawns to capture queens. Tran Hung Dao did exactly that. He ditched traditional naval tactics, didn't try to match the Mongols' numbers. Instead, he changed the game. Weaponized the river itself, and the Mongols, bred to dominate by force, had no answer. And here's the brutal truth beyond warfare. When you face a stronger opponent, don't play their game. Change the rules. Find asymmetric advantages. Use what they can't control: terrain, timing, information against them. David versus Goliath. David didn't fight hand to hand. He used a sling. Changed the game. That's what Tran Hung Dao did. Perfect asymmetric warfare. Bach is the textbook example. Back to the stake planting. Months of work. Thousands of laborers. Complete secrecy. That takes discipline. One Mongol spy discovers the plan and it's over. But the Vietnamese stayed silent. Night work. Isolated sections. Precision coordination. When the Mongol fleet arrived, the trap was flawless. That kind of preparation is rare. It's why the strategy worked. Then there's the feigned retreat. The Vietnamese had to execute it perfectly. If the Mongols smelled a trap, they wouldn't bite. So it had to look real. Panic. Maybe even sacrificing a few ships for credibility. And the timing had to sync with the tide. Too early? Tide doesn't fall? Too late? Mongols don't go deep enough into the stake zone. The window was tiny. And they nailed it. This wasn't luck. It was mastery. After Bach the Mongols pulled out. But it wasn't immediate. They still had land forces. Skirmishes continued. But without naval support, the invasion couldn't sustain itself. Supplies dried up. Reinforcements never arrived. The Vietnamese, riding high on naval victory, escalated guerrilla attacks. Constant losses. No relief. The Mongols retreated completely in 1288. Kublai Khan looked at the math. The cost outweighed any benefit. He quit. Vietnam stayed independent. The victory rippled beyond Vietnam. It inspired others. If Vietnam could beat them, maybe there was hope. Hungary had partially resisted. Japan got lucky with Typhoon's divine wind that destroyed Mongol invasion fleets. But Vietnam won through pure strategy. No lucky weather. No numerical advantage, just brains. The narrative shifted. The Mongols weren't invincible. In Mongolia, the defeat had weight. Kublai Khan already faced resistance from rival branches of Genghis Khan's family. Now his authority took another hit. How do you claim supreme power when a tiny kingdom beats you? His political position weakened, and the Mongol Empire began to fragment, split into separate khanates, each going its own direction. The unity Genghis Khan built started unraveling. Bach was one of the cracks that became chasms. Now the psychology of the trap. The Mongols were overconfident. They had conquered everything. That confidence made them predictable. Retreating ships? They assumed panic. That's how it always went. Cities fled, armies broke. Mongols pursued and destroyed. But Tran Hung Dao exploited that pattern. He knew they'd chase. He counted on their arrogance. He weaponized it. Psychological warfare at its finest. You're not fighting soldiers and ships. You're fighting expectations, thought patterns, arrogance. Break those patterns and you create something deadlier than any blade. Total confusion. When the Mongols realized the trap, panic hit. Commanders screaming conflicting orders, ships crashing into each other trying to reverse, soldiers jumping overboard with armor dragging them under. Absolute chaos. Meanwhile, the Vietnamese stayed calm, coordinated, in control. They knew exactly what was coming. They executed the plan like conductors leading a devastating symphony. Compare the earlier Mongol invasions. 1258 and 1285, the Vietnamese used guerrilla warfare, jungle ambushes, supply line attacks, burned crops, effective but not decisive. The Mongols absorbed losses and kept fighting. At Bach Dang, total devastation. An entire fleet destroyed in hours. That's different. A blow that can't be absorbed. That's why 1288 is the victory. Not the first, but the one that ended the invasions forever. A modern parallel makes this obvious. Cybersecurity. You can have million-dollar firewalls, state-of-the-art antivirus, all the money can buy. But a good hacker doesn't attack head-on. They find a vulnerability, a backdoor, a 6-line code mistake nobody saw, and they own you. All those expensive defenses? Useless, because the attack came from where you never looked. Tran Hung Dao did that 700 years before the internet. He didn't try to build a bigger fleet. He found the vulnerability Mongol dependence on deep water and exploited it ruthlessly. Their naval experience, their heavy ships, useless. The technical side. Why iron tips instead of just sharpened wood? Durability and force. Plain wood, even sharpened, splinters or breaks hitting reinforced ship hulls. Iron? Iron pierces. It creates a hole. Water floods in. The ship goes down or gets crippled. Plus, iron weight keeps stakes anchored in the riverbed. Strong currents could shift pure wood. Add iron and they stay put. Simple engineering. Devastatingly effective. The height, 10 to 16 feet. Why? They had to stay submerged at high tide invisible, but sit just below the surface at low tide, exactly where hulls pass. Too high? Visible. Too low? Ships pass over unharmed. Tiny margin for error. Tran Hung Dao got it right. That took precise tidal knowledge. The Vietnamese fished and sailed that river for generations. They knew the patterns, the rise, the fall, the distance. Centuries of accumulated knowledge. The Mongols came from steppes and mountains. Horsemen, archers, land warriors playing sailor. Not natural mariners. That knowledge gap killed them. Sun Tzu's famous line, "Know the enemy and know yourself, and in 100 battles you will never be defeated." Tran Hung Dao knew the Mongols, their tactics, their overconfidence, their reliance on brute force. He knew Vietnamese terrain, the rivers, the jungles, the tides. That combination let him build an inescapable trap. That's strategic genius. The local population's role matters too. Driving 500 stakes takes thousands of men. Months of work, cutting, hauling, sharpening, ironworking, low-tide digging, all secret. That's massive coordination and loyalty. One leak and the plan dies. But nobody leaked. Why? Because Tran Hung Dao wasn't just a commander. He was a defender. In the previous invasions, he led the fight. Didn't run, didn't surrender. He stayed and fought. The people saw that. So when he asked them to work, sacrifice time, risk lives, they followed. That's leadership versus tyranny. Leaders inspire loyalty. Tyrants force obedience. In war, loyalty wins. The Mongols ruled through fear. Surrender, spared, resist, massacred. Works for quick wins, but breeds resentment. And resentment fuels resistance. Vietnam endured 30 years of Mongol threat. The people were exhausted but determined. They didn't want foreign rule. So when Tran Hung Dao offered a planned sacrifice now, victory guaranteed, they committed. And that popular support was as critical as the strategy itself. Some argue the Vietnamese victory was lucky. If the Mongols discovered the stakes, if tides were different. Maybe. War always has luck. But luck favors the prepared. Tran Hung Dao didn't depend on luck. He created the conditions that made luck work for him. He picked the battlefield. He picked the timing. He forced the Mongols to fight his way. That's not luck, that's control. And he had backup plans if things shifted. Guerrilla attacks would continue. Supply line harassment would continue. Bach Dang was the main blow, but not the whole strategy. Part of a broader war of attrition, the cultural impact. Bach Dang became part of Vietnamese identity. Today, Tran Hung Dao is venerated. Temples, statues, schools named for him, holidays commemorating the battle. Why? It goes beyond military victory. It represents a small people defying a giant power. Brains over brawn. Independence. Powerful narratives. They shape how nations see themselves. Vietnam saw itself as survivor, fighter. And that identity shaped future choices. Centuries later, facing French invasions and American intervention, they drew from the same well. Resistance, guerrilla warfare, terrain knowledge, strategic patience. They won both times, not coincidence. Cultural continuity, tracing back to Bach Dang. And here's the bigger lesson beyond warfare. We celebrate size. More is better. More soldiers, more weapons, more money, more followers. Usually true, resources matter. But Bach Dang teaches an uncomfortable truth for the powerful. Intelligence is the great equalizer. Poor kingdoms defeat wealthy empires. Small forces destroy large ones. Startups topple billion-dollar companies. If smarter, if they know the terrain, if they have a leader thinking 3 moves ahead while others think 1. Inspiring. But also a warning. No matter your power, vulnerabilities exist. Something you don't know. And clever enemies find it. The Mongols learned that the hard way. So have countless leaders and nations throughout history. The strategic legacy. Bach Dang influenced military thinkers for centuries, using environment as weapon, turning weakness into strength, making enemies unable to use their advantages. This pattern repeats. World War II. Finland used winter and forests against the Soviets. Numerical advantage erased by terrain. Vietnam War. Viet Cong used tunnels and jungles against American technology. Modern asymmetric wars. Insurgents use cities to neutralize air superiority. All echo Bach Dang. All prove Tran Hung Dao's lesson is eternal. But honest. It doesn't always work. Sometimes brute force wins. Sometimes resources are unstoppable. Rome conquered most enemies by force. The Mongols, despite Bach Dang, still took 90% of the known world. We can't idealize this too much. But when force isn't enough, when you're outmatched, strategy is everything. Bach Dang is the masterclass. Imagine being a Mongol commander who survived. You watched 400 ships destroyed in hours. Watched comrades drown, armor dragging them under. Watched ships burn, water running red. You escape on a few damaged vessels. Then you face Kublai Khan, Genghis Khan's heir, conqueror of China. What do you tell him? How do you explain that the empire's largest navy was destroyed by wooden stakes? Tree branches with iron tips. It sounds ridiculous, cruel joke, but it happened. That's a lesson for every leader. Greatest defeats often come from simple things. Underestimating enemies, ignoring terrain, over-relying on your own strength, basic mistakes, catastrophic results. Kublai Khan, hearing the report, must have understood. He was smart. Unified China. Built a lasting dynasty. He knew when to cut losses. Vietnam, after 3 failures, was no longer worth the cost. Resources better spent elsewhere. He quit. Vietnam got peace. For decades, peace. Won with blood, brains, and wooden stakes. Consider, if the Mongols won? Vietnam absorbed. Vietnamese culture suppressed. Language changed. Traditions lost. All of Southeast Asia different. But it didn't happen. Because of the Bach Dang trap. 1 battle, 1 river, 500 stakes. History changed. That's the power of decisive moments. Points where a single action rewrites everything. Bach Dang was won. Credit the Mongols too. They were fearsome. Beating them once was huge. That Tran Hung Dao did it 3 times, 1258, 1285, 1288, is extraordinary. Not lucky. Consistent. Strategy refined each time. Each victory boosted Vietnamese morale, drained Mongol will. Eventually, the Mongols quit. They rarely quit. That says everything about Vietnam. But there's a lesson for the Mongols too. Brilliant on open ground. The steppe, cavalry battles. But when environment shifted jungles, rivers, fortifications, they struggled. They didn't adapt. They forced the same tactics. Worked most times. Not at Bach Dang. Key lesson. Adaptability is critical. Previous success doesn't guarantee future success if the environment changes. You adapt or you lose. The Mongols didn't adapt in Vietnam. They paid the price. Picture Tran Hung Dao before the battle. Months of prep. Thousands mobilized. Everything on the line. Lose and the Mongols win. Thang Long falls. His dynasty destroyed. Vietnam enslaved. Massive pressure. But he executed. Trusted the plan. Trusted his men. When Mongol ships entered the kill zone, he gave the signal. Success. That's leadership. Courage to risk everything on a plan, knowing failure is ruin. But also confidence from meticulous prep. Not gambling blind. He knew the tides, the river, the enemy. When he wagered, odds were in his favor. There's tragic irony on the Mongol side. Togun was an experienced general, fought many campaigns, knew leadership. But he was outmatched. Not incompetence. Tran Hung Dao was simply better. And the terrain was foreign to Mongol tactics. Togun survived and retreated. But his reputation shattered. Returning to Kublai Khan after losing 400 ships. Disgrace. History doesn't remember Togun kindly. He's the general who lost an entire fleet. That's his legacy. Unfair. Really, he lost to brilliant strategy, not his own mistakes. But history shows no mercy. It remembers winners. Losers get forgotten or mocked. Modern context. We have drones, satellites, cyber warfare. But Bach Dang's principles never die. Know your environment. Use your strengths. Exploit weaknesses. Universal truths. A hacker who understands systems can topple a well-funded corporation. An insurgent who knows a city can resist a modern army. A small nation with smart strategy can defy superpowers. Today, yesterday, tomorrow. Because fundamentally, warfare is about will, intelligence, and adaptation. Those don't require wealth or scale. They require leadership and vision. The greatest lesson? Never underestimate your opponent. The Mongols did. They saw Vietnam as insignificant, assumed victory. That arrogance blinded them. No terrain scouting. No unconventional tactics considered. Never imagined wooden stakes could sink their fleet. They paid. Leaders everywhere need this lesson. Respect opponents, no matter how small. Because the small often have tricks the big never anticipate. Tran Hung Dao lived to 1300, saw Vietnam flourish, watched his strategy studied. When he died, he was honored as a hero. But he never wanted glory. He wanted to protect his people, and he did. True heroism. Not fame-chasing, but purpose-driven. His purpose. Vietnam stays free. He delivered, through action, planning, courage, and 500 wooden stakes in a river. The Bach Dang story transcends military strategy. When you face an impossible challenge, remember, it's not resources, it's cleverness. It's knowing your ground better than anyone else. It's weaponizing your limits. You face disadvantages, right? Obstacles that seemed insurmountable? Bach shows those aren't endings. They're opportunities. Chances to think radically. Find your own Bach River. Plant your own stakes. If this resonated, if you saw your own battles here, like it, questions about Tran Hung Dao or other history-changing battles, comment. Want more stories of intelligence-crushing brute force? Subscribe. Because ultimately, the most powerful weapon isn't the sharpest sword or biggest army. It's the right idea at the right moment in the right place. That idea can come from anywhere. From you.